When we think of Aquarius, we often imagine visionaries, free spirits, rebels, and deep thinkers who challenge the norm. But what happens when that same energy is twisted by trauma, obsession, and darkness? In today's video, we're diving into the minds of three of the most notorious serial killers who share the Aquarius zodiac sign: Gary Ridgway, Luis Garavito, and Jerry Brudos. All Aquarians, all killers. Yet each one expressed this air sign's traits in disturbingly different ways, from Ridgway's cold calculation to Garavito's delusional justifications to Brudos's chilling obsessions. Could their shared sign offer insight into their psychology, or is it just eerie coincidence? Let's take a closer look, and you might never think of astrology the same way again. Gary Ridgway. He was found guilty of killing 49 women in the northwest of the United States between 1982 and 1998. Based on documented murders, he was thought to be the most prolific serial killer in American history at the time of his capture in 2001. Aquarius is known for emotional coldness or detachment. They tend to rationalize rather than empathize. In Ridgway's case, this might explain his ability to kill dozens of women over many years without remorse, often returning to the bodies and showing extreme lack of empathy. Alleged sex workers or other women in vulnerable circumstances, such as minors fleeing abuse, made up the majority of Ridgway's victims. Because his first 5 victims were discovered in the Green River in Washington state, media outlets dubbed him the Green River Killer or Green River Strangler prior to his capture. Usually by hand, but occasionally with ligatures, Ridgway strangled his victims. He would choke them and then dispose of their bodies in wooded and overgrown places, frequently going back to the bodies to engage in necrophilia. Since 1982, Ridgway had been a suspect in the Green River case, but at the time, authorities were unable to connect him to the killings. On November 30, 2001, Ridgway was arrested as he was leaving the Kenworth Truck Manufacturing in Renton, Washington, where he worked, after investigators were able to conclusively connect him to the killings, thanks to later developments in DNA analysis. He was spared the death penalty and given a life sentence without the possibility of parole as part of a plea deal in which he vowed to reveal the whereabouts of women who are still missing. Aquarians often exhibit a cerebral and calculated approach to life, especially when distorted in criminal minds. Ridgway was highly methodical. He confessed to deliberately targeting sex workers to avoid detection, used consistent methods of strangulation, and hid the bodies in similar locations. Aquarians can appear socially normal, yet inward live in a different world. Ridgway maintained a stable job, marriages, and a seemingly average life while secretly killing for decades. This split can mirror the Aquarian tendency to mentally detach from reality and isolate emotionally. While most Aquarians channel their unique mindset into innovation or humanitarianism, in darker manifestations it can lead to twisted logic and justification for abnormal actions. Ridgway believed he was doing good by eliminating sex workers, showing delusional moral reasoning, which can stem from a distorted Aquarian idealism. Ridgway confessed to murdering at least 71 victims. He is now 76 years old and still behind bars at Washington State Penitentiary. Luis Garavito. Another name for him is La Bestia, which translates to the beast. He was a Colombian serial killer, pedophile, necrophile, and sex offender who first sexually abused 200 people before killing 193 victims in western Colombia between 1992 and 1999, most of whom were young men and boys. Garavito was estimated to have essayed and tortured at least 200 minors after starting a series of torture essays on children between the ages of 6 and 16 in the fall of 1980. A total of 189 minors were essayed, tortured, mutilated, and murdered in Colombia between October 4, 1992 and April 21, 1999, and 4 more were murdered in Ecuador during the summer of 1998. Garavito was detained for months after his arrest on April 22, 1999, for the attempted essay of a 12-year-old boy named John Ivan Sabogal. On October 28, 1999, he finally confessed. The court decided that Garavito should spend 1,853 years and 9 days behind bars. Garavito is the most prolific serial killer and child molester in contemporary history, with at least 193 youngsters killed between his victims in Ecuador and Colombia. He killed 23 children and 5 adults, bringing his total number of murder victims to 221 if his 2003 confession is deemed credible. Aquarians often feel alienated or disconnected from traditional society. In a healthy person, this can lead to innovation. In Garavito's case, it may have evolved into disdain for social rules and boundaries, especially moral ones. His ability to rationalize extreme sexual violence and murder against children while seeing himself as a misunderstood victim reflects a deep detachment from human norms and empathy. Aquarians are known for separating emotions from logic or private life from public image. Garavito used aliases, disguises, and planned geographic movements to evade capture, showing a cold, calculated, and strategic mind. He even kept notebooks detailing his crimes, not out of guilt but control. Many Aquarians sympathize with the outsider. Garavito, who was himself a victim of childhood abuse and poverty, targeted vulnerable boys, street children, orphans, possibly because they reflected his own internalized trauma. His empathy was selective and distorted. He could weep for his own childhood but feel nothing for his victims. Aquarius is an air sign, often associated with mental energy and abstraction. Garavito lived almost entirely in his internal world, disconnected from reality and morality. His crimes weren't impulsive, they were ritualized and premeditated, feeding a personal fantasy world rather than a need for domination or money. Garavito died at a hospital on October 12, 2023, at the age of 66. Jerry Brudos. Yet again, we see vastly different expressions of the same sign. Known as the lust killer and the shoe fetish slayer, he was a serial killer and necrophile who abducted, essayed, and killed 4 young women in Salem, Oregon between 1968 and 1969. Furthermore, he is known to have tried to kidnap 2 additional young women. Aquarius is a sign often associated with the unusual, unconventional, and eccentric. In its positive form, this can mean originality. In Brudos' case, it manifested as a lifelong fixation on women's shoes and underwear starting from early childhood. Every one of Brudos' killings took place in his vehicle or in the garage or basement of the 2 houses he lived in at the time of the killings. Every victim was strangled to death. 3 of his victims suffered post-mortem dismemberment, and others were photographed both before and after they died. In order to show his dominance and to satisfy his sexual desire for women's feet, lingerie, and shoes, Brudos is known to have committed necrophilia with the bodies of his victims and to have kept specific body parts, the amputated feet or breasts of 3 of them. This cold clinical behavior aligns with the shadow side of Aquarius, which can become hyper-rational, emotionally distant, and focused on control rather than connection. Unlike more impulsive or rage-driven killers, Brudos displayed a mechanical curiosity. He experimented on his victims, took photos, and maintained a workshop filled with trophies. Aquarians are ruled by Uranus, the planet of experimentation and innovation. When misapplied, this curiosity can morph into dangerous detachment and perverse experimentation. Aquarius often carries the archetype of the loner or misunderstood genius. Brudos was isolated, bullied, and demeaned by his mother, who rejected him for being a boy. He grew up socially alienated, creating a fantasy world that revolved around dominance, femininity, and control, themes that gave him the illusion of power and identity he lacked in real life. In true Aquarian fashion, Brudos crafted a persona that he controlled completely, one where he was powerful, desired, and in command. His use of women's clothing wasn't just sexual, it was symbolic. It represented an idealized version of himself that he could never be in reality, a rebellion against the emotional abuse and control of his mother. In 2006, Brudos passed away from liver cancer while confined at Oregon State Penitentiary after being given 3 consecutive life sentences. Aquarius is often called the sign of the outsider, the rebel, and in the cases of Ridgway, Garavito, and Brudos, we've seen just how far the outsider can go when empathy is absent and obsession takes hold. These killers didn't just take lives, they lived in their own internal worlds, disconnected from reality, driven by ideals, fantasies, or perversions they couldn't control. But they're not the only Aquarians to have crossed the line into infamy. In the next episode of this series, we'll continue exploring other serial killers born under the sign of Aquarius and ask ourselves whether the stars really do reflect the darkest parts of human nature. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what zodiac sign you'd like me to cover after Aquarius.